But here, the prosecutor has been savvy. What she has alleged is that she's not alleging anything about guns. She's just saying that you were so reckless in your behavior, or what I would suggest your lack of behavior, that a reasonable person would believe that this could lead to the harm of a human being. And that's what we have here when you stack up the facts. And I think what we're going to see is the prosecutor trying to make a case that, but for the negligence of these parents, would these four people be dead? And you've touched on some of the facts already in your opening, and I've talked about it a little bit. But I think it's a fair presumption. We haven't even gotten into the interaction with the school officials, but I think it's a fair presumption that if these parents would have acted in any reasonable manner that is required by a parent, taking guns and out of it, these kids would be alive. The analogy that I would throw out to you, I think it kind of brings it home, because I think when you start talking guns, especially in Michigan, unfortunately, it narrows the focus. But, think about it in this context. If you had a 15-year-old boy and he's drunk, and you give him the keys to your car and tell him not to tell anybody that you gave him the keys to your car, and you send him out into the community, he gets caught, and you tell him, don't get caught next time, and he continues to drink and drive with that vehicle and kill somebody, I think it's a pretty straightforward case for most reasonable people. Unfortunately, the politics of guns and culture of guns in the state of Michigan, I think is going to blur that picture. But I think if we look at it in a broader picture as to what are our responsibility as parents, what are our responsibility as citizens when we see a 15-year-old boy behaving in the way he behaved, do we give him the tools to effectuate?
So to that point, because I definitely want us to touch upon, some of the state laws in Michigan versus other states. But to that point, with the prosecutors arguing that the parents' role here has to do with negligence, there's also been clearly some issues that the son has had as well in the way in which he's been raised, and in one way or another, he has been sort of encouraged into this path, which has been explicitly sort of seen. What has been the defense's argument so far? And do you think, based on what we know, that the parents will be held legally responsible in the end?
So as far as the parents are concerned, I do believe they're going to be held legally responsible. Now, involuntary manslaughter carries a maximum of 15 years in prison in the state of Michigan. And, we don't, you don't ever get the maximum. It doesn't matter, what your situation is. You don't ever get the maximum. Michigan, the best case scenario, or the worst case scenario, depending on what lens you're looking at it through, is 2/3 of the maximum. So the most these people could ever be sentenced to on this charge is 11, 12 years in prison. And I think that's even unlikely. Usually we see a sentence on the 2 to 5 year, maybe even 7-year range for a charge like this. Now, with 4 dead kids and multiple others injured and the entire world looking, I suspect that this judge, who I'm familiar with, and this prosecutor, who I'm familiar with, are going to seek the high end of the guidelines, which will, subject these parents to up to 5 to 7 years in prison, potentially more. But I think that's a realistic expectation if they're convicted.